Welcome to today's Explainer. So take a quick second and just look around you right now. The walls, the windows, the concrete foundation literally right beneath your feet. We are totally surrounded by the physical materials that build our modern world. But there's a really profound tension here between these finished, polished environments that we live in and the raw, genuinely dangerous realities faced by the human beings who extract and process all those materials. Today, we're digging into the critical data behind that reality.
It's honestly a question that rarely crosses our minds when we stroll into a shiny new office building or cruise down a freshly paved highway, right? What unseen human costs actually go into the concrete, the glass, and the raw materials that build our everyday environments? Because the truth is, behind every single ton of cement and every pane of glass, there's a workforce out there facing some incredibly stark realities and extreme risks.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the human cost of construction, and then move into the acute hazards on the front line. After that, we'll look at the silent threat of silicosis, how we're tracking safety with metrics, and finally, protecting the workforce.
Section 1. The human cost of construction.
So when we talk about workplace hazards in this specific sector, we aren't just talking about, a slippery floor or a poorly designed office chair. We're talking about life and death here. According to the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or the SASB framework, the construction materials industry faces relatively high mortality rates. And that is not an exaggeration. It's a stated fact right there within the financial and sustainability reporting standards. The extraction and the processing of materials like aggregate, sand, gravel, and cement, they carry some really severe inherent risks.
Moving on to Section 2. Acute hazards on the front line.
The standards explicitly highlight severe acute hazards coming from two main sources: heavy equipment use and active quarrying operations. I want you to just picture the sheer scale of a quarry for a second. We're talking about massive, multi-ton excavators, controlled explosives literally blasting apart solid bedrock, and these giant crushers grinding boulders down into gravel. The sheer kinetic energy involved means the environment is constantly shifting, and danger can come from literally any direction. It's a loud, visceral, and immediately dangerous frontline environment where just a single split-second mistake with that heavy machinery can be absolutely fatal.
But here's the thing. The standards don't just view this solely through a humanitarian lens. They connect it directly to the viability of the business itself. As this code outlines, worker injuries, illnesses, and fatalities result in regulatory penalties, negative publicity, low worker morale, and increased healthcare costs. So the really crucial takeaway here is that human tragedy translates directly into undeniable business impacts. Safety is framed not just as an ethical obligation, which it obviously is, but as a fundamental operational and financial risk that absolutely must be managed.
Section 3. The silent threat. Silicosis.
Now we have to contrast the loud, immediate physical dangers we just talked about with a completely different reality, an invisible, long-term threat. Long after those massive machines are turned off, workers face severe chronic health degradation from microscopic exposures. And in the construction materials industry, the primary culprit for this is silica dust inhalation. Now, what's really interesting here is how the World Health Organization clinically defines this. Silicosis is pneumoconiosis resulting from exposure to dust containing silica, and the standards require reporting on clinically diagnosed cases of chronic, acute, and accelerated silicosis. To put that into perspective for a second, these microscopic shards of crystalline silica are roughly 100 times smaller than a grain of ordinary sand. 100 times. Workers inhale them without even noticing, and those tiny shards permanently scar the lungs over time, essentially slowly suffocating them. It is a completely devastating, silent disease.
Because this threat is just so severe, the SASB standard actually requires entities to track a very specific, unforgiving metric: the exact number of reported cases of silicosis. And get this, it isn't just for the people currently on the job site. The disclosure mandates tracking this exact number for both current workforce members and past employees. This is huge because it brings strict accountability to this invisible disease, ensuring that companies literally cannot just ignore workers once they retire and those awful symptoms finally start to appear.
Section 4. Tracking safety. The metrics. All right, so we've looked at the problem, both the sudden acute hazards and the chronic diseases. To bring standardized accountability to all this chaos, the SASB framework strictly dictates workforce health and safety reporting. Basically, it removes the guesswork completely. Companies cannot rely anymore on vague, fluffy claims about having a great safety culture. They have to provide the exact quantitative rates dictated by the standards so that investors and regulators can compare their performance totally objectively. So what are those metrics? Well, the first major one is TIIR, or the Total Recordable Incident Rate. This tracks work-related injuries or illnesses that result in death, days away from work, restricted work, or medical treatment beyond just basic first aid. It's calculated based on 200,000 hours worked. But we really have to remember, behind every single decimal point in this rate is a real human being whose life was altered, whose body was injured, or who tragically didn't get to go home to their family at the end of their shift.
Next up is the NMFR, or near-miss frequency rate. A near miss is exactly what it sounds like, an unplanned event that did not result in injury or damage, but absolutely had the potential to do so in slightly different circumstances. This is essentially the industry's way of tracking warning signs. It's the falling rock that missed a worker by 3 inches. It's tracking those terrifying moments where a tragedy was narrowly avoided, which allows companies to step in and fix the system before a near miss becomes a fatal statistic.
Crucially, these standards are incredibly comprehensive. These incident rates must be tracked and disclosed not just for direct, full-time employees, but for contract employees as well. Whether it's an independent contractor, a temp agency worker, or migrant labor supervised by the entity, everyone on that site faces the exact same hazards. This ensures companies simply cannot artificially lower their safety risk profiles by outsourcing all the most dangerous jobs to vulnerable third-party contractors.
Which brings us to Section 5, protecting the workforce. So we have the hazards and we have the metrics. Now, to specifically combat the devastating effects of crystalline silica exposure, the standards require companies to explicitly disclose their mitigation efforts. Step 1 is stopping the dust at the source through rigid engineering controls. Think of things like water suppression systems spraying down rock crushers, along with strict ventilation compliance. Step 2 is deploying comprehensive respirator programs for when that dust simply cannot be contained. And Step 3 mandates strict safety training procedures so every single worker truly understands the invisible risks they face. It's really about building a bottom-up culture of safety.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen the human costs, the massive machinery, the microscopic silica dust, and the rigid metrics required to track all of it. So, how might this level of forced transparency and standardized reporting fundamentally change the safety culture of the world's heaviest industries? Because when you are actually forced to count every near miss and every sick worker, ignoring the human reality is simply no longer an option. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world built around you.